I appreciate that you made a return visit. Lew visited last March. He is the CEO and president of the World Trade Center of Utah. And before moving to Utah in September 2006 to establish the World Trade Center Utah, Lew served as managing director of Summit Ventures International, which is a Washington, D.C. based strategic business consulting firm focusing on international business development, major project financing, and advocacy issues for both domestic and global companies. Previously, Mr. Cramer served as Director General of the U.S. and Foreign Commercial Service, leading the U.S. government's commercial staff of 1,400 employees at over 120 embassies overseas. His government service is in the Reagan and Bush 1 administrations, to include Assistant Secretary of Commerce for International Trade, Deputy Assistant Secretary of Commerce for Science and Electronics, Executive Director of President Reagan's Export Now Business Initiative, and White House Fellow with U.S. Trade Representative. He's worked extensively with the global telecommunications and broadband sectors, including as Vice President for Media One International and U.S. West, responsible for their international government and multilateral financial institution relations and public policy. Mr. Cramer is currently serving as chair of CDC Solutions, which is an international organization established by the first President Bush to foster business development in the former Soviet Union. He also serves on the board of the Financial Services Corp and American Management Association and many others. For over a decade, Mr. Cramer taught international business at Georgetown University and the University of Southern California. He has lectured and written extensively on international business and government topics around the world. Previously, he practiced corporate law in San Francisco, the Bay Area, and in Los Angeles. Mr. Cramer holds a BA and JD degree with honors from BYU. He and his wife Barbara live in Salt Lake and are the parents of 6 kids. Wow. Thank you.
Thank you so much. He wasn't supposed to read that long biography. I was falling asleep over here, so I don't remember. It's good to see some friends like James Williams here from University of Utah. Is this your lovely wife?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, sir.
Oh, great. Good. Thanks for coming, making the tour. Good to see some other familiar faces. Can you hear? Does this work? So far, so good? Great. What an honor to be here. Thank you very much. I'm grateful to always come to Salt Lake Community College. President Biotto is one of our international trade warriors. We've taken her on some trade missions, and next week she's receiving an honor as the Athena pathfinding woman in the state of Utah from the Salt Lake Chamber of Commerce, which is a huge honor. So it's great to have that kind of leadership at this wonderful institution. I know you've got Professor Black and Professor Wilson and others here that make this happen. I wanted to talk for the next half hour or so about international trade and business, what it means in our lives, and then have some time for questions if that works in your schedule. All righty? Thank you for being here. Students are the lifeblood. You are our future. You will be paying my Social Security someday, I hope.
Yeah.
We really want you to succeed. This is important. And the world in which you're succeeding is certainly different than the world that I grew up in. So we have a lot to talk about today. I just returned about 2.5 weeks ago from 10 days in China, and I came back very nervous about the future because the Chinese, they're, kind of like the moving sidewalks you see in the airports, and they're on those moving sidewalks, and we're not quite as fast. We were in Shanghai. They have 4,000 buildings over 25 stories high. And one of the persons I was with said there are 128,000 people in Shanghai that are worth more than 10 million US in their assets. That's a huge force. They're adding $2 billion a day to their foreign reserves in China. So that's a competitor. These forces of globalization are sweeping the earth. Well, thank you for being here. Now, I know every professor is supposed to make sure that they understand their audience. Let me just ask, how many of you lived for more than a couple months outside the United States? A few? Where did you live?
Germany.
Germany. Wunderbar. We've got the German ambassador arriving tomorrow here from Washington, D.C. Great. A few more hands up. One more time. Let me just ask. Yes, young lady.
Colombia.
Colombia. We hope to get a free trade agreement with Colombia someday soon. Our president can push that along. How many speak another language besides English? Quite a few more. What would you speak?
I speak Cambodian and Spanish.
Excellent. And where did you learn those?
I was born as a Cambodian, and Spanish I just learned in high school.
Excellent. Well, that is an interesting challenge in this global world to, in fact, be able to communicate with other people. And those who speak more than one language follow. There's a great German poet named Goethe who said, "He who speaks more than one language sees the world with more than one eye." And it's such an avenue into the soul to have that, into the culture of a society, to be able to speak 3 or 4 languages as you do and others. So, highly recommend that. Well, I'm going to be asking you, and I think there's a pen here maybe. Chris, could I just go through some numbers? I mean, I don't do PowerPoint because I figure everybody's PowerPoint, right? You turn on the power, as soon as the lights go down, forget that audience. But, oh. Thanks, Des. Just any color that you got, blue and red. How about that?
Okay, good.
You know, little utes, little cougars. You know, little everything here. Okay, well, we're going to start at some of the very basic concepts here. And first, I'm going to share some good news about the state of Utah. Last year, the state of Utah had the best economic performance in international trade of any state in America. You know, if I were to ask most audiences, you know, which state in America had the greatest increase in its merchandise exports, you know, you probably wouldn't guess a small state in the middle of the Rocky Mountains without a seaport, would you? Thanks, Chris. We got starts here. Utah, in fact, was that state that did that. And the first question, you know, I always have to start out. I taught at the University of Southern California for a long time in Los Angeles. They had a funny story there about one Saturday. Their football team's fabulous most of the time, but one time this one guy just could not hold on to the football, and so the coach made him carry the football everywhere he went. You know, every class, in the shower, to bed, he had to carry his football. And even though USC Trojans are, you know, a good football team, sometimes they're not the brightest athletes in the world. I'm not saying that just because I taught there for many years, but it's a reality. And the coach had to start over when they were having so many problems. He got up in front of the football team and said, "Okay, let's start at the very beginning. This is a football." And he went from there. And they had a great season after that. They started with the fundamentals. So I hope I'm not, you know, retracing old ground, but I want to go through some fundamentals in the world of international business and why it's important to us in Utah. So first of all, what's the difference between an export and an import? And I'll just call on somebody and ask for names. And young lady, your name?
Roberta?
Roberta. What is the difference between an export and an import?
One is going out of the country, one's coming in.
And I would trust the one going out would be exports. Great. Why in the state of Utah do you think that the World Trade Center, which I'm a representative, is so focused on exports as opposed to imports?
Specialization.
Okay, I'm sorry, tell me your name. Who's answering? Yes.
It's Crystal.
Crystal, why?
Specialization other countries produce and develop other things that we can't. Well, we could, you know, we can make it here, but just cheaper to do it.
Sometimes it's cheaper to buy an import, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
But if you're always buying imports from overseas, what does that mean for your job growth in your own state? James, what does it mean?
It means that we're not getting jobs the way we need to. If we export, that means we've got jobs here, and we're moving our products around the world.
Right, and people who are creating those products in Wellsville are getting paid for it. So we push exports in this state because exports create jobs. Exports equal jobs. And imports, like Crystal was saying, lots of places you can buy things cheaper than you can make them in the United States. A for the day. Do we have a trade deficit with the rest of the world in imports and exports? Roberta? Do we have as the United States, do we have a deficit with the rest of the world in regard to buying imports as opposed to exports we sell? Well, do you think we buy more things from China than we sell to China?
Yeah.
We do. We have a trade deficit. We have a huge trade deficit. Last year was almost $650 billion trade deficit. And why is that? Crystal, why would we be buying more from China than we're selling to China?
Technology.
Technology meaning what? Don't give me just one word answers. Give me
Yes, you said
context.
advancement earlier. You were saying that they're already like steps ahead.
I'm sorry, I'm not getting the context of what you're saying then.
Yes, like they're already ahead from what we can produce.
Well, maybe some of the things we buy from overseas, like our televisions and the flat screen TVs, which come from Taiwan, are an example of that. A lot of the things we buy from China, though, are toys. They're other things that doesn't require a lot of technology to make them. It just requires cheap labor to make them. So, yes, tell me your name.
Oh, I was gonna say that cheaper. The labor's cheap. We can pay them. They can get paid like $1 an hour. And here you have to pay them like $8 or $9.
$10. So that's one of the reasons that happens. Exactly right. And imports, you know, for an American to buy an import, all you have to be able to do is to speak English and write a check in dollars, right? You can go to Walmart and buy all the imports you want. But as James said, to actually export something, to sell something from this state or country overseas, you have to have something that people want to buy. It has to have high technology, good quality, the right price. And you usually sell it in, you know, Portuguese or excuse me, German or some other language. And you have to be able to sell it in a currency other than dollars. You have to figure out how to get paid for it. But when you do that as a producer in the state of Utah, that creates jobs here. You know, if you're buying products from China and they're paying them $1 an hour, then there's not a creation of jobs in this state. They're creating them in China. And you know, obviously the trade has got to be two-way. If you're not trading with China and selling things to China back and forth, then you're only stuck with the things you've got in your country. And there's a lot of things you can only buy in China, and particularly in the rare earth side and other technologies, Crystal was saying. So trade is a good thing. And in this recent election, it was very frustrating to hear that some of both sides of the parties saying, gee, we don't need to open our markets up. We need to be protectionist. We don't want to buy products from abroad. That kind of talk is very dangerous, because if protectionism really worked, if you could close your borders and not buy products from somewhere else, North Korea would be the most prosperous nation on the planet, right? I mean, it's got closed borders. And the newsflash is it's the least prosperous nation on the planet. So protectionism and closing your borders doesn't work. Okay, in this great state of Utah, how many people live in Utah, ballpark? A couple million? 2 to 3? 2.5, getting close. It's about 2.8 million. 2.8, that's the population of Utah. That's supposed to be million here, sorry. In a state this size, what do you think our exports were last year? The state of Utah, and I'm talking, there's two kinds of exports. We're going to talk first about merchandise exports. You know, tangible things like you sell a piano overseas, you sell some beef overseas, and then there's service exports. We'll talk a little bit more about the differentiation. It's a lot easier to keep track of all the pianos you sell than all the software and the tourists that come here, which are service exports. But what would you think? Last year in the state of Utah, I said that we had the best export performance in America. What do you think the amount of exports last year are? There's a gentleman up there working on his computer. He's going to have the answer quickly. Did you get the answer?
I didn't. I have no idea.
Give me a guess.
30%?
A number. We're talking a number.
10 million?
10 million? $10 million. That would mean that for every person in the state of Utah, we exported less than $4 worth of goods. Let's be optimistic here. This is a state with the best performance in the country. It is bigger than 10 million.
500.
500 million. That would take us, yeah, they were getting close. I'll cut to the chase. It's $10.4 billion worth of exports last year from Utah to the rest of the world. That is a large number for a state of only 2.8 million people. That's huge. I mean, as I said, we led the nation in growth. Because last year we were the only state in the nation that had growth in our exports, merchandise exports. That's a big number. The reason why it's important everybody see it here is somewhere in there, in $10.4 billion worth of exports, there's got to be a job for you. You know, some opportunities. Tell me your name.
Coleman.
Coleman.
That was only for the merchandise?
That's merchandise exports from the state of Utah to the rest of the world.
That has no services included in it?
Not in that number. And the reason why we know what that number is to the penny is that everybody ships a product, you know, a tangible, you know, a piano, a chair, a piece of beef, they have to fill out a shipper's export declaration. And when it leaves this country, you can say, this thing is valued at X and we're sending it overseas. Now, Coleman, what other kind of products, exports do we have? What was that second category that I alluded to as we started?
No services.
Services. What are some examples of services from this state, specifically? Service exports. This is merchandise, commodities, whatever, and then we have services.
You mentioned software.
Software, huge. You know, we've got some mini Silicon Valleys. We call them Silicon Slopes sometimes around here. You know, within 30 miles of where we're standing.
Why would that be so hard to track, an exact dollar amount?
Very much, it's on the internet. Nobody says to you, no, at least nobody from the Census Bureau that keeps track of this stuff. The Commerce Department says, Coleman, how much did you ship out overseas to Japan this last year? You can say my gross revenues from my company to the IRS were $10 million, but they don't ask you how much that would have went overseas. They may survey you, but there's no legal requirement to talk about it. So software gets on the wire and who knows where it goes, right? What are some other examples of service exports from this state? Young lady, tell me your name. Elisa. Some other service exports.
Well, would it be like, I'm thinking like call centers or,
Yeah.
you know,
Call center services?
service as a person maybe, you know, contracting work out?
Precisely, very good. Like lawyers, accountants doing international work. You know, they again don't have to keep track to the IRS about how much of it's international. That's an absolutely good example. We have, you know, freight forwarding companies, logistics companies, even airlines, some of that. Travel and tourism. You know, if somebody from Colombia comes here or from Cambodia comes here and spends their dollars and their money and buys dollars and goes visits Moab and the Grand Canyon or goes skiing, that's an export because dollars are coming from, money from overseas is coming and becoming dollars here. That's a large, large part of the state's economy. In fact, we don't know exactly what that number is. Like Coleman says, it's hard to track it. But the U.S. Department of Commerce says we presume it's about 40% of whatever you do here, about 40% of merchandise exports will be reflected in service exports. And it's probably growing because we have some great software companies here. We license products. We franchise products. We have lawyers, accountants, and you know, freight forwarders doing things. So another 40% is roughly $4 billion, right? Okay, that's looking like $14 billion in exports from this state. And if you combine that with the imports, we say we have a trade deficit, right? We don't know, again, you don't import by state. You import into Los Angeles or to the port in Seattle and it's shipped to a distribution center and goes whoever knows where. Yes, Lisa.
Is that per capita or is that total?
Is what per capita?
14 billion for our population, or is that 14 billion versus California's 10 billion? California has a lot more people than we do.
And their numbers are a lot
Per
higher.
capita.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Well, this is a total number for the state of Utah.
Okay.
And you divide this into that to get the per capita. On the per capita basis, we're probably higher than California. But California gets credit for a lot of products that get shipped out of their seaports that didn't originate in California. If you're shipping coal from southern Utah, it goes to Long Beach and gets in a container. And they don't know where that coal came from. They don't care where that coal came from. It's shipped out of Long Beach port. And so Long Beach or San Francisco gets credit for it.
They're getting credit for it.
They're getting credit for it. And so we don't have a seaport. We don't get credit for any of that big stuff. There's some other things we don't get credit for, like if a shipment's under $2,500, the Census Bureau says forget it, we don't care about it. You know, there's so much going on. We shipped over $1 trillion of exports as a nation last year. Anything under $2,500 we don't care about. Most of the nutraceutical companies in this state, their products are shipped out under $2,500. You know, they ship them to their distributors or wherever they may be. And nutraceuticals are a $6 or $7 billion a year business in this state, and 60 or 70% of that goes overseas. So per capita, the thing we're a state of, we are what we are, but this number is higher than it was last year in merchandise exports. There is no other state in America where this number was higher. California was down, 17%, Arizona was down 26%. We were up in our exports. So the trend lines are good, and we're a small state, and per capita, I think we are, obviously, percentage-wise, our growth is the highest, but I don't know in total numbers where we stand exactly. Okay, my point on the 14 billion a year in exports, you add about the same amount in imports if if the trade numbers are accurate. And that's about, approaching $30 billion a year, $30 billion a year in this economy, in the state of Utah, is based on international trade. That's huge. There's a job there for you somewhere, particularly if you speak another language and do international business. What's the gross state economy, do you think? The gross state product, ballpark? State this size, we're about $110 billion a year. The gross state, and our distinguished professors probably tell me there's no such number, but the gross state product, GSP. So, if you're looking at 110 billion of gross state product and 30 billion of it's international trade, 1 out of 3, 1 out of 4, 1 out of dollars are touched by international business in this country, in this state. That is huge for a state in the heartland of America to have that kind of opportunities. Washington State's always talking about it's the state most dependent on international trade, and California has the most exports, and Texas sends a lot of oil. But for a state that's not a border state, Utah is really, really leading the country in international trade. So that's exciting. And I think probably that's why you're sitting here today, other than the fact that it's snowing outside. You might as well be warm, right? Well, stop on in. But these are the opportunities for the future going forward. Utah is a globally minded state, and each of you, I hope, intends to be a part of this going forward. And other things we could talk about that impact these numbers, such as foreign direct investment. The Chinese love to come here. Governor Huntsman, most of you know probably, he's the U.S. ambassador where now? China. And people come into him and say, Chinese people come in and say, I want to invest. Where should I go? And the governor says, you know how to find LA. You know where New York is. Hey, try a second-tier city. Try Utah. We've got Forbes ranking is the best state in America to do business. People like international experiences here. We have good, clean government. We have a lot of reasons to come to Utah. So I spent a lot of my time. In fact, as soon as I leave here, I've got to run back. We've got some Chinese visitors. One who owns a major golf course in Beijing. To get membership in that golf course is like $150,000 for membership in a golf course. He's turning people away. I mean, there are so many people who want to take advantage of this. And interestingly enough, I was a little late because I was talking to a gentleman who has golf simulators. These things you hit up to a wall, and selling like gangbusters in China. Because not everybody can go golfing in China, but they want to buy a simulator. Utah companies make these. We want to sell these abroad. So there's some exciting business going on around there. Okay, now the question is, how do you prepare yourself to take advantage of this? How can you be part of the opportunities abroad? How many? Is there an international business major here that you could take at SLCC?
I believe so.
How many of you are business majors in this group? Just about everybody? Anybody who's not? What's your major?
Construction management.
Construction management. Lots of opportunities in building industries, right? Opportunities are out there. Well, there's an old business guru, now dead, but Kristen does remember him, named Peter Drucker. He said in the future there will only be 2 types of CEOs. Those that are international, those that are unemployed. That's the world we're living in. That's the opportunity. When I worked in the Reagan administration, we had a going away party for a CEO. He turned 65. He was of a Fortune like 150 company. So, good sized company. And for his 65th birthday retirement party, we gave him a present, a passport. He'd never had a passport. That would never happen today. He'd be one of those unemployed CEOs. We are in a global environment. If you really want to have an interesting perspective on this, go home tonight and look in your clothes closet. See where your clothes are made. Where were your shoes made? Lithuania. Anyone know where Lithuania is? The Baltics. The suit was made in Lithuania. There is precious little opportunity in today's world to be protectionist, like we talked about North Korea, like we talked about America. 95% of the world, 95% of the world is outside of America, outside the United States. And by various studies, I saw one that said between now and the year 2020, which is next 10 years, 60% of the growth in this world will be outside of North America, Japan, and Europe. It's going to be in China and Asia and Cambodia and other places like that. I had a friend who was telling me, I have boring friends. We just do international stuff, but the stories are great. He runs a factory in Uzbekistan. You know where Uzbekistan is? You know, Pakistan, Uzbekistan. It's one of the stands, middle of nowhere. And he does factory work. And he said, I'm getting outsourced work from China because the labor costs in China, going up to $2 or $3 a day, or $6 or $7 a day, are such that T-shirts and necktie manufacturers are now being outsourced to Uzbekistan. I mean, that's the way the world is working today. And there's a new book out by James McGregor called 2 Billion New Consumers. And he says, if Americans want to drive their kids or grandkids to tennis lessons and ballet lessons in a Hummer, they better, which are basically frivolous, optional activities. You know, a Hummer, ballet lessons is great, but it's not key. If Americans want to drive their grandkids to ballet lessons and tennis lessons in a Hummer, they better plan on being smarter than the rest of the world, because the rest of the world is working harder and longer than Americans are. And we know that's the case. I mean, when I was over in China, we were in Hong Kong, we were walking out about 10:30 at night, on a Wednesday night, out of our restaurant. We were walking back to our hotel, and I saw hundreds of young people coming out of this big warehouse-like building. And I said to my Hong Kong host, I said, what is this, a movie theater or something? It's 10:30 at night on Wednesday night. He said, those guys are all studying for their MBAs. They're studying English, whatever. Education is the jet fuel that they know is their future. That, you know, they're committed to being farther along in this knowledge curve. I have a very smart nephew. It's on my wife's side, so I take no credit for how smart he is. But he's a radiologist. Do you know what a radiologist is? What do they do?
Interpret X-rays.
Exactly. Read X-rays all day long. That doesn't sound very interesting, but it's clearly, thank goodness somebody does it, and he makes a lot of money doing it. He reads X-rays from 8 in the morning till 6 at night. But at 6 o'clock at night, he has been doing that. And let me tell you his background. He was working in a hospital in Indianapolis. And at 6 o'clock at night, when he'd go home, those X-rays would be digitized and put on a T1 telecom line and sent to Bangalore, India, where some very smart, US board certified radiologists would read them for the next 12 hours and send the results back to the Indianapolis hospital in the morning. The interesting thing was they were very good, very smart, very efficient, and they were paid 1/10 of what my nephew makes as a radiologist. As I say, he's very smart. He says, you know, this is not going to work. I've got to get farther up that knowledge curve. So last year he left his hospital in Indianapolis, took almost an unpaid fellowship at Duke Medical School so that he could become some kind of oncology radiologist, somewhere up on that knowledge curve, so he was smarter than his competition in India. The lesson from that is, if it can be digitized, in today's world it can be outsourced, it can be offshored. You know, you can't digitize or offshore, you know, doing the janitorial work in this office. You know, flipping a hamburger, you can't send that to Brazil. But you can send reading X-rays, you can send anything else that can be digitized across the world. And so his story is all of our stories. We need to see where we are in that knowledge curve so that we can be globally competitive. I hope you all have heard of Thomas Friedman and The World is Flat book. The world is flat. Globalization is sweeping this planet. It's very flat. And even, you know, the mountains of Utah are not going to keep us safe from this tsunami of globalization sweeping across the world. So we have to have those skills, move up on that knowledge curve, so that we can be competitive with the rest of the world. And you say, hey, look, I'm never going to, you know, I own a dry cleaning plant, or I run a laundromat, or, you know, whatever. I'm not going to be globally competitive. Well, the answer to that is there are many things happening in this world, in the world of globalization and foreign policy and international finance rates and everything, that have total impact on your business. How much your supplies are going to cost, what your financing rates are going to be, what kind of labor force you can get. Even if you're not getting on an airplane, you know, every week to fly to Taiwan, your competitors in Taiwan know how to find you here in Utah, and they're going to be flying here. So you've got to be globally competitive in that kind of environment. Okay, I've romped through this pretty fast. I haven't even asked you some of these questions. As you're sitting here saying, what in the world is this guy talking about? Let me ask you some other questions. Among these merchandise exports in the state of Utah, what's our #1 export? What sector, what category of merchandise? Salt. I'm talking by value. Salt's pretty cheap. It's not salt. But you're close. Say again?
Copper?
Copper. Primary metals, copper, gold. Close to salt, right? For 150 years, it's been primary metals. It's been our #1 export in this state. It probably will be for the next 150 years. Kennecott wants to expand its operations out there. So we are we're built on mining, and what the result of that is, we don't just take things out of the earth and send them to the rest of the world. We also have mining service companies. We have drill bit companies. Boart Longyear, which is just down in South Jordan, is the 3rd or 4th largest publicly traded company in the state. They do drill bits, lead the world in drill bit servicing. So a whole industry has grown up around our mining industry in this state. Most of the mining takes place out there in the western hills. But what's the #2 sector category, do you think, of exports in this state, in the merchandise area? James, we talked about this, I think. Maybe we didn't.
With computer technology.
Exactly. You were listening. Cool. It's computers, high tech, electrical. That's the #2 for a state of our state. That's very cool to have that. Because that is a growth industry, and it's growing a lot faster than the mining industry is growing. And that's the high tech area. And it has, as Coleman was saying, it has associated services as well. But the fact is, the real gold in this state is not in the eastern hills, Kennecott, but it's in the mines, MINDS, in the western hills, being you guys, the University of Utah Research Labs, and BYU and Utah State. That's where the real opportunities are, is in the high-tech industries. Have you heard of IM Flash down there by Thanksgiving Point, the big plant? That is it's a computer chip fab plant. That is the most, according to them at least, and they have no reason to say otherwise, that is the most efficient computer chip fabrication plant on the earth. People come from Malaysia all to see it. Crystal was talking about competition and technology. We do have some great technology in this state. Sometimes we don't appreciate it. Sometimes we don't exploit it. Sometimes we, say, hey, we'd rather go play football. But we do have some really great technology in this state. And that's where our second big growth area is. And the third, it's interesting, you all probably do something reasonable with your time. I read trade statistics when I go home. My wife, I am really boring. But the third item, the third sector is transportation equipment. We sell aircraft parts, airbags. We do some really cool things in transportation and machinery at this state as our export areas. Okay, well, I've romped through a while. Questions? I can talk forever about international trade, but I seek some questions. I'm going to probably ask you some more if you don't ask me some. We've got about 10 minutes, 15 minutes. And tell me your name again for you.
Francis?
Francis, the man of salt, supporter of salt. Yes, Francis.
Thomas Friedman.
Say again?
Thomas Friedman?
Friedman.
Oh, Friedman.
Yeah, Tom Friedman. And is F-R-I-E, F-R-E-E? Friedman, I think it's the E. He's written a book called The World is Flat, making it clear that globalization is here to stay. It's not just a passing fad. And that globalization, which is fueled by better transportation, better communication, the internet, and by the fact that we can now transport goods much more easily, allows us to be in a globally competitive world which drives down prices but makes more cost competition in jobs and other things. I mean, that's a short thesis. But it also says this tsunami of globalization is unstoppable. You're not going to all of a sudden say, oh, I'm not going to use the internet. I mean, try that in China. It's like, putting your hand in the Missouri River. It just doesn't stop. And Friedman has then written a sequel called Hot, Flat, and Crowded, which talks about what kind of world we're living in. It's getting hotter, the climate change. Flat, still flat, and much more crowded. The Chinese, for example, having just been to China this last couple weeks, is certainly a microcosm, although it's a pretty big microcosm of Friedman's thesis, namely that we are becoming more flattened. We know that because the Chinese are selling to the whole planet. Much hotter. They're working a lot in China on clean energy. Big focus on clean energy. Because, for example, I was in Beijing. You could almost, me and Coleman, that was about as far as you could see. The pollution was so bad. Because they have, they put one new coal-fired plant online every week, I've been hearing, in China. Coal builds pollution. Beijing attracts pollution because it's got 18 million people. But while we were there, the one Saturday, literally I could not see any farther than the end of this room, It rained that night, and the next morning, it was so beautiful. From our hotel, we could see the Great Wall about 25 miles away, crystal clear. Then 2 days later, it all settled kind of back in because they have so many cars there and so many challenges. But they want to get to those challenges. So China is working very hard to use these reserves, and I mentioned they're adding $2 billion a day to the Federal Reserves, to their international currency reserves. Their surplus in foreign currency is reported to be $2.5 trillion. You know, trillion plus that's U.S. debt. And so if they want to do something that we don't like, or we do something that they don't like, there's a lot of leverage out there. Okay, I cut you off. You just mentioned the name Tom Friedman. I started babbling. Was there a point on that besides trying to get the name right?
I had heard that China owns about 95% of the world's market of rare earth metals.
It may be even higher than that. We don't know. It's high. And you saw what they were doing last month. They were cutting them off to Japan. And you need that to make some of the high-end titanium and other things. Yeah, so there's a lot of leverage out there. But you know, China, you know, you can't do this. If you're playing the game in the world market, you have to play the game the right way. And there will be ways that will not redound to their benefit. Thanks, Francis. Yes, tell me your name.
Sonia.
Sonia, yes.
What do you think of, like, in just the state of Utah, you know, about a lot of the jobs that are being moved to different countries, like outsourcing?
How many jobs? Are jobs being moved to other countries, do you think?
Yeah, like, for instance, my mom works in ICU Medical. Have you heard of that?
Yeah, I'm sorry, what medical? IC Medical?
Yeah.
I do not know. Is that a manufacturer?
It's a factory where they do, like, chemicals. It was originally Abbott Laboratories.
Oh, yes, right.
Yeah.
Was it spun off from Abbott?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And it used to be American-owned, and now it's being owned by Mexicans. And soon they say, like, around this month, that they're moving out to Mexico.
So obviously, and we don't want to leave those jobs go somewhere else. In a world economy, there'll be individual displacements, and you know, the easy answer is, let's get up that knowledge curve, like my nephew in the radiology, so that the higher paid and higher talented jobs can in fact remain here in Utah or in the United States. There are obviously, in a world economy, there's going to be a lot of displacements. Overall, trade, you know, works. Comparative advantage really does work. And in your mother's situation, if there are other jobs, or if Abbott, in this state in particular, in the medical and bioscience industry, we're creating jobs. I mean, there may be displacements here, but there's new jobs being created. So that's the dynamic that's popular. I spent most of my career in the telecommunications business in the private sector. We would try to outsource things to Mexico, and we had an example. You know, Mexican labor, this is 15 years ago, was 1/10 as expensive as American labor. But the problem is, they're only 1/20 as effective. So we were losing money sending jobs to Mexico. So we said, that's dumb. We're going to send them to, you know, Denver, Colorado instead. We pay more, but we get better quality out of it. So that's the challenge you face in this circumstance. In the biomedical world, too, there's a lot of regulatory requirements and other things that the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, requires. And people in Utah are uniquely trained, you know, to follow the rules. You know, they color within the lines. They do the right kind of training. And so, on balance, you see the growth in the bioscience area quite expanding quickly in this state. Good. Good, Sonia. Thank you. Yes, Coleman.
What's our biggest import? When you said 14 billion out, 14 billion in?
Yeah, and the estimate of 14 billion is purely who knows kind of thing. Well, who do you think the largest importer in the state of Utah is? What'd you guess? Say again?
What was it?
Who's the largest importer? Which company is the largest importer in the state of Utah? Brings the most stuff in from overseas? Walmart. Walmart. It imports a lot. Number 2 is R.C. Willey. They import a lot of furniture from China. You know, that creates some jobs. I mean, R.C. Willey sells things. But it'd be a lot better, like Sonia said, if we were creating the furniture in Utah. And so I work with a woman named Natalie Gochner, who's brilliant, and her husband, Chris, makes handmade furniture. It's really cool, high-end stuff. He sells that for tens of thousands of dollars because he's up that knowledge curve, you know, we're talking about. And it's been highly positive for him. But, you know, again, it's a skill thing. That's why I'm so grateful you're here training, getting this, you know, education, which is your jet fuel going forward. there was what is that French? There's a French philosopher, no, it's Voltaire. It wasn't him, but someone said, the future of any country depends on what its 19 to 25-year-olds are thinking. And you know, thank goodness, I hope you guys are thinking business, how can I be competitive? Let me learn an extra language. Let me get that extra class so I can come up that knowledge curve. So that's what we're counting on. Okay, there was another hand that I didn't recognize. Professor.
The Federal Reserve and the Treasury, the value of our currency is heading downhill. How does that play into protectionism and our own wealth here in the state and all that kind of stuff?
That is the question of the day. That's why he's the professor. That's why you want to be like, Professor Wilson's asked, what happens when our dollar becomes less valuable particularly against the Japanese yen right now? A year ago it was 140, 135, and now it's 85. I mean, that is a huge drop in the US dollar against currency. Why do we allow that to happen? Why would we allow our currency to go down like that? Yes?
It makes purchasing our products more attractive to
Exactly.
foreign investors.
Very good. It sure does. So it increases our export opportunities, right? However, if you have a trade deficit as we do, if you're importing more than you're selling, particularly from countries that aren't revaluating, then that burden is even heavier for us. In the olden days, how many of you excuse me, saw the movie Ferris Bueller's Day Off? One of the great movies of our generation, right? Remember Ben Stein saying, class, Bueller, anyone, in his econ class? What was he talking about then? Do you remember what the issue was? I mean, the whole movie's so funny, but being a trade guy, I remember this. He was talking about the Smoot-Hawley trade tariff barriers. Remember that? And that was an attempt to try and put up these higher barriers so other countries couldn't buy our products. And it was coupled with a currency devaluation challenge. We keep dropping the price of our currency so that we can export more and therefore create the more jobs at home. Eventually, that is not a winning proposition in my mind. And I had lunch yesterday with the woman who runs the Swedish Chamber of Commerce. And she said, you Americans are going down the wrong path by devaluing your currency. We did that in Sweden 20 years ago. It killed us. They had half their banks failed. Sweden was a mess. She said, we decided we had to have our export industries, of course, be supported, but we had to have a stronger currency. So I'm nervous about that.
Isn't that part of the strength of China, though? Is that they regulate their currency and keep it low?
Well, they tie it to the US dollar. Yeah, and that we can talk a lot about that. The US government is, I don't know if you saw the headlines in the Wall Street Journal today. We've had this ongoing battle about the Chinese need to revalue their currency because it should be stronger. And what would be the impact of a stronger currency in China? What would that do to the Chinese?
Their product that we're importing would be higher priced.
So we'd probably import less of them. And the products we'd sell to them they'd have a better opportunity to buy our products.
Yeah.
We'd have a better opportunity to sell it. And it would also increase their domestic consumption, which is a big push. If the Chinese would quit trying to be totally an export-driven economy, and in fact, try and be a more balanced economy so their consumers would buy things instead of always trying to ship them to the United States, then there would be a rebalancing the economy, as they call it. Well, over the weekend, the German finance minister said publicly, it was in the major newspapers and in the leading news magazine in Germany, he said, the American currency system is, in a polite way, screwed up. I mean, they really are. The Americans are not doing the right thing, and they are hypocrites because they claim the Chinese are manipulating their exchange rates. They're manipulating as much as we are, which is true. I mean, we just put $600 billion to the Federal Reserve, cleansing machine. So the whole world is meeting this next week in Seoul, the G20, to talk about this. And the Germans and the Chinese and the Indians all think the United States are doing the wrong things. I got to think we're doing the wrong things too. We're not saving. We're not building our our industrial base. We're not doing those kinds of things that a smart nation would do. I mean, we're running doing these $1 trillion deficits. I don't want to turn this into a political conversation, but it really is an economic challenge for our country going forward. You can't put a couple $1 trillion of new debt on you and have the Chinese buy that without some kind of repercussions. And it comes down to what can we sell, what do they want to buy, and what price. Yeah, that conversation could be very interesting. The outsourcing conversation in the political rhetoric got kind of, I think overwrought as well. The number one reason why jobs go overseas is because of technology. It's not because, our waging, it's technology. Where can we do this more efficiently? Sure, some call centers are going to go to the Philippines, but the major jobs, China lost last year 1 million plus jobs in the manufacturing areas because Vietnam became more efficient. Taiwan became more efficient by technology, not because of the yuan or anything else. It was technology. James, did you have a comment?
I was going to ask you a question. What steps do you see Utah making in the next year to improve our position globally in relationship to exports?
Great question. What would you suggest? I'm open for any ideas.
That's a good question.
Well, first of all, we have to get some smart people turned out like you all that will work in these high-end, export industries typically pay 15 to 20% higher than normal wages. So first of all, we have to get you smarter and more committed to making this happen. Francis, did you have a comment on that as well?
Well, I know that commodities are definitely getting way up there, like copper, silver, gold. I mean, it seems like even agriculture will be hitting the high note as well.
Yeah. Well, the Chinese are out there buying up the world's commodities. I mean, and when I was in China, we'd heard it was no secret. They want to be out there, and they own, somebody told me they own like 80% of the fertile farmland in the Belgian Congo. Now, the guy said he was in Nairobi, walking through the streets, not Nairobi, well, he was in Nairobi, but he was also in Nigeria, walking through the streets there, and 1 out of 7 people were Chinese. And when they go there, they just want the commodities. They're not looking at good governance or taking care of the people as much. All this is broadly stated, of course. I mean, there's specifics that we could get into. But the Chinese are out there, and they're smart enough. They can buy up these commodities, and so that's our challenge. How do we combat it in the state of Utah? Well, the kinds of things we're trying to do. World Trade Center, the thing I run, is a nonprofit. Our job is to be non-profitable and make your companies, every other company in Utah, profitable by connecting with international market opportunities. So we do that endlessly. I'm on the phone trying to get people in Utah connected with the right agent in Brazil, the right distributor in Bangladesh, ensuring that they could get their financing. We had a company in Woods Cross call the other day. They said, we do $1.5 million a year in orders, a medical fabricating company. We just got a $2 million order from the Middle East, which is more than they sell every year. So we've never done international trade. And when people come in with international trade issues, the two things they always want to say is, how do I get paid? How do I ship this? So this is the same thing. These guys from Woods Cross said, we make this big metal fabrication. We've got a $2 million order. How do we get paid? How do we ship it? I said, who's your banker? They said, Zions Bank. I said, this is your lucky day. The Senior Vice President for International Trade, Mark Garfield, he knows how to get you paid. Letter of credit, whatever. Here's his phone number. You call him. Now, shipping, we really are. Utah really is the crossroads of the West. I mean, you look at where the railroad lines come in, where the interstates come in, where the airports come in. We have nonstop flights to Asia, nonstop flights to Europe. We are the crossroads of the Western United States. You cannot ship anything profitably from Texas to Canada without going through Salt Lake City. And that's just the way the roads work and the Colorado River and the Sierra Nevadas work. So, in that kind of context, I go to every opportunity I have, smart people like you and others, and say, get in the international business. Think about it. There are in this state, somebody told me one time there are 60,000 companies registered to the Department of Commerce in this state. 2.8 million, maybe it's more than that. But there are only about 2,700 companies that are involved in international trade and exporting. So somewhere between 60,000 and 2,700, there's a ripe market. For me, the biggest market is companies that are already exporting. If you're already selling to Canada, I can come talk to you and say, look, you've had an experience, you have a marketing guy, you've got an international vice president. Let's go from Canada. Let's try Mexico. Let's try. If you've never exported at all, that's a lot bigger, mountain to get over. Say to you, okay, now this is a football. This is an export. This is an opportunity for you. I go to guys and say, have you exported? Yeah, we sell a lot to California. No, that's not it. That's not how we work. Exports are when you actually, you can ship more from making more Delta to Dusseldorf than Delta to, Detroit these days. There are a lot of, so that's, a quick romp through what we do. We are out of time, but let me just thank you again. Tom Brokaw, the old broadcaster, said, it's easy to make a living, but it's tough to make a difference. by looking at international business, you can really make a difference for yourself, for your kids, for Roberta and others who are paying my Social Security. You can make a difference. There's some real opportunities there. Peter Drucker, I quoted him earlier, another great line: the best way to predict the future is to create it. You can create your own future by preparing to participate in this international economy. Hey, it's great to be here. Thanks for all you're doing, and go Wolverines, right? SLC Wolverines? Is that what you are? Bruins. I blew it. Go Bruins. Hey, thanks so much. Good to see you.